Bullies trap new black girl in locker for 12 hours, unaware she is a karate black belt. Jasmine was new to this town, new to this school, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. It was her first day in a small town school, and everything felt strange. Moving from the big city to a place like this had been a huge change for her. It wasn't the kind of place where people of color were common, and she quickly realized that she was the only black girl in her senior class. Jasmine didn't mind being different, but it made her feel like everyone was watching her, even when they were. She stood outside the school building, looking at the massive front doors. The red brick of the school looked old and worn, but it was familiar to everyone who had attended here for years. The students inside had grown up together, and it seemed like they all knew each other. Jasmine was a stranger in their world. She felt nervous as she walked into the hallways. The walls were lined with lockers, some dented from years of use, others polished by students who'd been here for ages. Everyone had their groups and cliques, and Jasmine could already tell that she didn't fit into any of them. It felt like no one was interested in getting to know her. She walked through the corridors, trying her best to look confident. Jasmine was a quiet person, not the type to draw attention to herself. But even in the back of her mind, she knew that people could tell she was new. She could feel the stares and hear the whispers behind her back. Some of the other girls giggled when they saw her, and she could hear them say things like, "Who's the new girl?" or "I've never seen her before." It was uncomfortable, and Jasmine just tried to walk past without making eye contact. Her first class was English, and as she stepped into the room, she noticed a few students already sitting in their seats. Most of them didn't pay attention to her as she walked in. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, smiled at her warmly. "You must be Jasmine, right?" she said kindly. Jasmine nodded. "Yes, ma'am," she replied softly, standing by the door. Mrs. Patterson asked her to take a seat near the back of the class, and Jasmine did just that, quickly finding an empty desk near the window. She sat down, hoping the class would start soon so she could blend in and not draw any more attention. But the moment she sat down, she noticed a group of girls staring at her from across the room. They were sitting at the front, and one of them, a girl with blonde hair named Caitlin, was the loudest of the group. She had a sharp, almost judgmental look on her face as she observed Jasmine. "She's not from around here, is she?" Caitlin whispered to her friends. They all giggled, and Jasmine felt her face grow warm. She didn't like being the subject of people's conversations. It wasn't long before Caitlin and her friends started making more comments, this time a little louder, just so Jasmine could hear. "She probably doesn't even know how to talk to people here. She's probably so used to the big city," Caitlin said with a smirk. Jasmine kept her head down, hoping they would stop, but it only seemed to make them more curious. As the class went on, she could hear them muttering about her behind her back. She hated it. This wasn't what she wanted. She had hoped for a fresh start, not to be treated like an outsider. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the class, Jasmine quickly grabbed her things and left the room. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She had always kept to herself in her old school too, but this was different. People didn't stare at her there. They didn't talk about her in the hallways. She missed the days when she could just walk through a crowded school without feeling like all eyes were on her. As she walked down the hallway toward her next class, she noticed that some of the students were still watching her. Some looked away quickly when she caught them staring, but others didn't seem to care. Jasmine wished she could just disappear. She knew she had to stay strong, though. She had been through difficult times before. When she entered her second class, math, she quickly found a seat near the middle of the room, far from the other students who had already made their groups. There was a boy sitting in the seat beside her, and he smiled at her as she sat down. "Hey, I'm Mark," he said, extending his hand to her. Jasmine hesitated for a second, surprised by his friendly greeting. She shook his hand cautiously. "I'm Jasmine," she said quietly. Mark nodded. "Nice to meet you. Don't mind Caitlin and her friends. They're always making fun of new people, especially if they're different." Jasmine appreciated his kindness but didn't say much in return. She was used to people who would say things like that, trying to make her feel better, but she didn't think it was ever that simple. Still, she smiled weakly, grateful that Mark didn't seem like one of the people who wanted to make her feel uncomfortable. The class began, and Jasmine tried to focus on the lesson. She was a good student, and math was one of the subjects she excelled at. But as the teacher spoke, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Caitlin and her friends had stared at her, the way they had whispered. At lunch, Jasmine decided to sit alone in the cafeteria. She didn't know where she belonged yet, and she didn't want to sit with strangers who might talk about her. She found a quiet table near the window and took out her lunch. It was a simple sandwich and some fruit, but it was enough. She ate in silence, watching the other students talk and laugh, making connections she wasn't a part of. Out of the corner of her eye, Jasmine saw Caitlin and her friends walking through the cafeteria. Caitlin glanced around before noticing Jasmine sitting alone. A mischievous grin appeared on her face. She leaned over to her friend, whispering something. Jasmine didn't want to hear it, so she quickly turned her attention back to her food. But as Caitlin's group approached, Jasmine felt the tension rise. She knew they were going to say something, and she braced herself for it. She tried not to let it show how much it bothered her, but it did. She hated how easily they could make her feel so small. "Hey, Jasmine," Caitlin called out, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "You might want to move. We don't want to get too close to you. You might make the rest of us uncomfortable." Jasmine felt her heart race, but she didn't respond. She just kept her head down, hoping they would leave her alone. Unfortunately, it seemed that Caitlin wasn't finished. "Or maybe you could join us sometime," she added with a mocking tone. "You know, we might teach you how to fit in." Jasmine could feel the eyes of everyone around her, and it made her feel even more isolated. But she refused to let them see how hurt she was. Instead, she stood up slowly, gathered her things, and walked out of the cafeteria without a word. As she walked down the hallway, she felt like she was in a dream. The laughter, the whispers, the stares, they all blended together. Jasmine had never felt so out of place in her life. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to be easy. And it wasn't going to be the last time Caitlin and her friends would try to get to her. Jasmine's second day at her new school wasn't much better than the first. The whispers had continued, and Caitlin and her friends seemed to be finding more and more ways to make her feel like an outsider. They'd stare at her when she walked by, making sure she knew they were watching, and then whisper to each other with sly smiles. At first, Jasmine tried to tell herself it didn't matter. After all, she had been through worse before. Moving to a new place wasn't easy, and she had dealt with difficult situations in the past. But it was different here. The stares, the whispers, and the way people avoided her, it was beginning to wear her down. The school wasn't huge, but it felt like a maze to Jasmine. The halls were always crowded, and it seemed like everyone knew everyone else. Jasmine stuck to her own schedule, keeping her head down, trying not to draw attention to herself. But no matter how hard she tried to keep to herself, Caitlin and her group always seemed to find ways to bring the attention back to her. In the mornings, before the first bell rang, Jasmine would walk through the halls toward her locker. It was always the same. The girls would be gathered by their lockers, laughing, talking, and throwing quick glances at her. At first, Jasmine would try to ignore it, but soon she found it harder and harder to do so. It felt like they were always watching, always waiting for her to slip up. One day, as she was walking to her locker, she overheard Caitlin talking with her friends. Jasmine couldn't make out the words exactly, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a mocking tone. It made her feel sick to her stomach. She quickly turned her head, hoping they wouldn't notice her, but Caitlin had already seen her. "Hey, Jasmine," Caitlin called out, her voice loud enough for everyone around them to hear. "You know, you really should try to be more social. It's not healthy to just hide in your corner all the time." Jasmine felt her heart race. She didn't want to deal with this, not again. But this time, something in her snapped. Instead of walking away like she usually did, Jasmine stood still for a moment. She turned to face Caitlin and the group. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but not unkind. Caitlin raised an eyebrow, a smile creeping onto her face. "Oh, come on, you've been here for days and you haven't even tried to make any friends. Do you think that's normal, or are you just used to being a loner?" Jasmine's mind raced, but she kept her face calm. She didn't want to let Caitlin get to her, but it was getting harder to keep her composure. "I'm fine," Jasmine said, her words even. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone." Caitlin's smile widened. "Oh, we get it. You're just too good for us, right?" She snickered to her friends, who joined in with quiet laughs of their own. Jasmine's face flushed, but she didn't let them see how much it hurt. She had always been good at hiding her emotions, something her karate training had taught her. It wasn't about being tough, it was about keeping control. "Whatever," Jasmine said softly. "I don't have time for this." She turned quickly and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel Caitlin's eyes on her as she left, but she didn't dare look back. It was becoming harder to ignore them, but Jasmine didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. They didn't deserve to see that side of her. Later that day, as she sat in her last class, Jasmine couldn't help but think about what had happened. Was Caitlin right? Was she really just hiding in her corner? Jasmine had always been shy, even in her old school, but she never thought it was something that could make people think badly of her. But what hurt the most wasn't the words Caitlin said, it was the way everyone around her seemed to accept it. No one ever stood up for her. No one ever said, "That's enough," or told Caitlin to leave her alone. Jasmine had hoped that someone, maybe even a teacher, would see what was happening and step in, but it never happened. It was like everyone just turned a blind eye. The day dragged on. At lunch, Jasmine found a quiet spot in the cafeteria to eat her lunch. She didn't want to sit with anyone, not today. She just needed to be alone to clear her head. She had made a habit of sitting by herself, and while it wasn't ideal, it was better than feeling like an outsider at a table full of strangers. As she sat there trying to focus on her food, she noticed Caitlin and her friends walk into the cafeteria. They were laughing and talking, but this time, they seemed to be paying special attention to Jasmine. They noticed her sitting alone and exchanged glances, a knowing look passing between them. "I can't believe she's just sitting there all by herself," one of Caitlin's friends said, loud enough for Jasmine to hear. "Doesn't she realize we're all just having fun and she's not even trying to be a part of it?" Jasmine's face flushed, and she quickly turned away, hoping they wouldn't notice. But Caitlin had already spotted her. She made her way over to Jasmine's table, with the rest of the group following behind her like a pack of wolves. "Jasmine," Caitlin said with a fake sweetness, "are you really going to sit here all alone? You're not even trying to join the rest of us. Do you not want to have fun or something?" Jasmine looked up at her, her jaw clenched. She wanted to say something to tell Caitlin to leave her alone, but she knew that would only make things worse. So instead, she just gave a small shrug. "I'm fine, thanks," she said, her voice steady. "I don't need anyone to tell me how to live my life." Caitlin's smile faded, and she looked at Jasmine with something between disdain and amusement. "You know, you should really lighten up. You're not going to get far being so serious all the time. You should learn how to have fun." Without waiting for a response, Caitlin turned away and walked back to her friends, who were already giggling. Jasmine sat there for a moment, the weight of their words settling heavily on her shoulders. Why did it have to be like this? Why couldn't they just leave her alone? But Jasmine didn't let it break her. She had been through tough situations before, and she wasn't going to let Caitlin and her friends get to her. She had learned to stay strong, even when the world seemed to be against her. She had learned that she could handle anything as long as she kept her mind sharp. As the days went by, the bullying continued. It wasn't just Caitlin anymore. It was the whole group. They would whisper behind her back, make snide remarks, and laugh when she walked by, but Jasmine refused to let it control her. She knew that no matter how hard they tried, they could never take away her strength. She had karate to keep her grounded. When she wasn't at school, she would go to her local dojo and practice. It was the one place where she felt like she belonged. There, her skills mattered more than anything else. It didn't matter who she was or where she came from. It only mattered that she kept working hard and improving herself. And that was exactly what she did. Every time Caitlin or her friends said something hurtful, Jasmine would push it aside and focus on her training. She would practice her strikes, her blocks, and her movements. Each practice session helped her build a stronger sense of self, a stronger belief that she could overcome anything that came her way. Jasmine knew she wasn't just going to sit back and let them win. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her who she was or what she was capable of. She was stronger than they realized, and one day they would find out just how strong she could be. The days seemed to blur together for Jasmine. Each morning, she would wake up with a sense of dread, knowing she had to face another day at school. The tension in the air never seemed to go away. Her peers still stared, whispered, and avoided her. Caitlin and her friends continued to make her life difficult, but Jasmine refused to let them break her. Every time she walked through the halls, she felt the weight of their gazes on her, like they were waiting for her to mess up, waiting for her to show weakness. Jasmine was tired of being the target, but she refused to show them how much it hurt. She learned long ago that if you gave bullies the satisfaction of seeing you suffer, they would only make it worse. So, Jasmine kept her head high, even if it felt like the world was against her. She spent her mornings walking to class as quickly as she could, trying to avoid being noticed. But it wasn't easy. Caitlin seemed to have a sixth sense for when Jasmine was around, and she would always find a way to make a snide remark or a cruel comment. Jasmine would hear her laugh, or the whispers, or sometimes even Caitlin's voice loud and clear. "She's still alone," she'd say, just loud enough for Jasmine to hear, making sure everyone else heard it too. But Jasmine was determined not to let them get to her. She didn't have to fit in with their group. She didn't need to be like everyone else. Deep down, she knew she was stronger than this. She had her karate, her discipline, and her inner strength. When she practiced her moves at the dojo, she felt at peace. It was the one place where she could leave everything behind, her worries, her fears, and the stress from school. One afternoon after school, Jasmine walked into the dojo as usual, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The familiar smell of wood and mats filled the air, and the sound of punching bags and the rhythmic thud of feet hitting the floor was a comforting sound. She had grown up practicing karate with her father, who was a black belt himself, and it was the one thing that had always kept her grounded. She bowed to her instructor, Mr. Tanaka, who greeted her with a smile. "Ready to practice, Jasmine?" She nodded. "Always." As she tied her belt, she felt a sense of relief. The dojo was her safe space. No one here judged her based on the color of her skin or her quiet nature. The focus was on skill and respect, and she could pour all her energy into improving herself. Karate wasn't just about fighting. It was about discipline, balance, and staying calm in the face of adversity. Jasmine began her warm-up exercises, stretching her limbs and focusing on her breathing. The rhythm of her movements was comforting, a way to clear her mind of the noise from school. She had learned early on that karate was a way to defend herself, not just physically but mentally too. It taught her how to control her emotions, how to stay calm even when things were chaotic around her. That night, as she practiced her roundhouse kicks, Jasmine felt a sense of empowerment. Every move, every punch, every kick brought her one step closer to her goal of being stronger, physically and mentally. She wasn't going to let Caitlin or anyone else tell her who she was. She knew who she was, and that was enough. The next day at school, the bullying continued. Caitlin and her friends made their usual cruel comments, but Jasmine stood tall. She didn't let them see how much it bothered her, even though inside it was taking its toll. She had learned to bury her feelings, to pretend everything was okay, but sometimes the pressure became too much. One day, after another encounter with Caitlin, Jasmine found herself walking to class with a heavy heart. The words Caitlin had said to her echoed in her mind, and the more she thought about it, the more it hurt. "You don't fit in here, Jasmine," Caitlin had sneered. "Why don't you just leave?" For a moment, Jasmine considered it. She thought about just walking away from it all, transferring to another school where no one would know her, where she wouldn't have to face the constant taunts and the whispers. But then she remembered the dojo, the calmness she felt when she was there, the strength she was building with each practice. She couldn't give up. She couldn't let them win. At lunch that day, Jasmine sat alone at her usual spot in the cafeteria. She had grown used to it by now. It was better than sitting with people who made her feel uncomfortable. But today, something was different. As she opened her lunchbox, she saw someone approach her. It was Mark, the boy she had met in math class. He had noticed her sitting alone, as he often did, but today he didn't just walk past. He sat down across from her with a friendly smile. "Hey, mind if I join you?" he asked. Jasmine was taken aback. No one had ever asked to sit with her before. She was used to being ignored, avoided even, but Mark didn't seem to care about that. He just wanted to sit and talk. Sure," she said, surprised by the sudden kindness. Mark unwrapped his sandwich and began eating as if nothing was out of the ordinary. There was no awkwardness, no pity in his eyes. He wasn't trying to make her feel better or lecture her about the bullies. He was just being himself, and that was more than enough for Jasmine. They began talking about school, and Jasmine felt herself relax for the first time in days. Mark was easy to talk to, and his genuine interest in her thoughts made her feel valued. They had similar interests, both loved history and music, and they quickly found common ground. For the first time, Jasmine felt like she wasn't completely alone. She wasn't sure if Mark was just being friendly or if he really understood what she was going through, but it didn't matter. His company made a huge difference in her day. She wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't have to pretend everything was fine. With Mark, she could just be herself. But as the days went on, things started to shift. More students began to notice Jasmine. They saw her sitting with Mark, and they saw that she wasn't the loner they had assumed she was. Slowly, the whispers began to fade. It wasn't that the bullying stopped immediately. It didn't. Caitlin and her friends still found ways to make Jasmine's life difficult, but now there was a glimmer of hope. She had someone to stand with, and that made all the difference. In the following weeks, Jasmine found herself spending more time with Mark. They studied together, shared notes, and even began hanging out after school. His kindness and understanding began to chip away at the walls Jasmine had built around herself. She wasn't as afraid to speak up in class, and she didn't feel as out of place anymore. Jasmine realized something important during this time. She wasn't going to let Caitlin or anyone else decide who she was. She had the strength to stand up for herself, and with the support of Mark and her karate training, she was starting to believe in her own worth. It wasn't going to be easy, and she knew there would be more difficult days ahead, but she was no longer alone. Jasmine was learning to fight not just with her body, but with her heart, and that made her unstoppable. As the weeks passed, Jasmine started to feel like she was gaining some control over her life at school. The whispers from Caitlin and her friends never fully stopped, but they didn't have the same power over her anymore. She was no longer afraid to face them, and it wasn't because of some big confrontation. It was because Jasmine was beginning to realize her own worth. She wasn't the quiet, invisible girl they thought she was. She had something they didn't understand, a strength that came from within, built on years of karate training and a deep sense of self. She still practiced every day at the dojo. Karate had always been her way of dealing with challenges, but lately it was more than just an escape. It was her way of building confidence and proving to herself that she could overcome anything. Every punch, every block, every kick made her feel stronger and more capable. She wasn't the same shy girl who had walked into this school months ago. She had changed. One afternoon after school, Jasmine was heading to the dojo when she saw Caitlin and her friends standing outside the school entrance. They were laughing as usual, but there was something different about the way they were looking at her today. For a brief moment, Jasmine felt a wave of anxiety, but she quickly reminded herself that they no longer had the power to control how she felt. She stood tall, squared her shoulders, and walked past them without acknowledging their presence. Caitlin, however, wasn't going to let it go so easily. "Hey, Jasmine," she called out. Her voice was loud, and she seemed to be trying to get attention, but Jasmine didn't stop walking. Instead of responding, Jasmine kept moving. She was determined not to let them pull her into their drama. She had more important things to focus on, like her karate, and her training was helping her stay grounded. But Caitlin was persistent. She walked up to Jasmine and blocked her path. "What's the rush?" Caitlin asked, her tone mocking. "Got somewhere to be, or are you just running away?" Jasmine stopped and turned to face her. The same tension that had been there from the beginning was back, but Jasmine didn't feel the same fear she once had. She took a deep breath, looking Caitlin in the eye. "I'm not running away," Jasmine said quietly but firmly. "I'm just not interested in whatever game you're playing." Caitlin laughed. "You really think you can just ignore us? You don't even belong here, Jasmine. You should just leave, go back to wherever you came from." Jasmine's chest tightened, but she didn't back down. Instead, she let the words roll off her like water. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm here to stay, and you don't get to decide that for me." For a moment, there was silence. Caitlin's smirk faltered just slightly, but she quickly recovered. She wasn't used to being talked to like that. Jasmine could see the surprise in her eyes, and for the first time, Caitlin didn't have an immediate response. With one last sneer, Caitlin stepped aside, allowing Jasmine to pass. "Fine, whatever, don't say I didn't warn you," she muttered as Jasmine walked by. But Jasmine didn't look back. She didn't need to. The confrontation had been tense, but it was the first time Jasmine had stood up for herself like that. In the past, she would have avoided the situation, hoping it would pass. But now, she felt stronger. She realized she didn't have to hide from people like Caitlin. She could face them head-on, and she didn't need to let their words affect her. Later that afternoon, as Jasmine entered the dojo, her instructor, Mr. Tanaka, noticed the look on her face. She had a calm yet determined expression, something he hadn't seen from her before. "You seem different today, Jasmine," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" Jasmine smiled, her posture relaxed but confident. "I had a run-in with Caitlin and her friends today." Mr. Tanaka nodded as if he had expected that. "And how did it go?" "I didn't back down," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "I told her I'm not going anywhere, that I'm here to stay." Mr. Tanaka smiled. That's the spirit. Remember, it's not about what others say or think. It's about how you respond. You've got the strength, Jasmine. It's been inside you all along. Jasmine felt a sense of pride swell inside her. She had always known that her karate training had given her strength, but it was moments like this, when she could apply that strength outside the dojo, that made her feel unstoppable. She wasn't just practicing karate for the sake of self-defense. She was practicing it to defend her sense of self, her peace of mind. The next few days were quieter. Caitlin and her friends didn't bother her as much. They still tried to make snide comments when they saw her, but Jasmine had developed a new sense of inner calm. The more she practiced her karate, the more she felt at peace with herself. She wasn't concerned with what others thought of her anymore. She knew who she was, and that was all that mattered. One day, as Jasmine walked through the halls, she was surprised to see Caitlin standing by her locker, but this time something was different. Caitlin wasn't laughing or looking down on her. Instead, she seemed almost unsure. "Jasmine," Caitlin said, her voice softer than usual. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Jasmine paused for a moment. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she could tell this wasn't the usual taunting. Slowly, she nodded. "I just wanted to say something," Caitlin continued, looking down at the floor for a moment before looking Jasmine in the eyes. "I've been a jerk to you, I know that, I'm sorry." Jasmine blinked in surprise. She wasn't expecting an apology, especially not from Caitlin, who had made her life difficult for so long. But as she looked at Caitlin, she could see something that wasn't there before, genuine regret. "I guess I was just, I don't know, jealous," Caitlin said, her voice trailing off. "You seem so confident, and I didn't like it. I thought I could tear you down, but it's just made me feel worse." Jasmine felt a wave of understanding wash over her. She had been in Caitlin's shoes before, feeling insecure, trying to cover it up with rude behavior. But now, Jasmine wasn't angry. She wasn't ready to hold onto the past. "I understand," Jasmine said gently. "We all have our insecurities, but it's never too late to change." Caitlin nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thanks, Jasmine, I'll try to do better." With that, Caitlin turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine standing there, reflecting on how far she had come. The girl who had been so afraid to speak up, so afraid to stand her ground, was now facing her bullies with strength and maturity. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was learning to forgive and move forward. As the days continued, Jasmine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced before. The school wasn't perfect, and there would still be challenges ahead, but she knew she had the strength to handle whatever came her way. She wasn't alone anymore, and she was finally starting to feel like she belonged. As the weeks passed, Jasmine continued to grow stronger, both in karate and in herself. Her relationship with her classmates had slowly started to shift. She wasn't the girl who stayed quiet in the corner anymore. She wasn't the girl who let Caitlin and her friends walk all over her. Jasmine had learned to stand up for herself, and it had made all the difference. Even Caitlin seemed to soften. While she wasn't exactly best friends with Jasmine, there were no more rude comments or loud whispers. It was as if the whole school had started to notice the change in Jasmine, and with it came a sense of respect. People weren't avoiding her as much. In fact, a few students had started to sit next to her in classes, and she had even begun to form small connections with people she hadn't spoken to before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Jasmine was also continuing to practice karate with more determination than ever. Her instructor, Mr. Tanaka, had noticed the change in her too. She was more focused now, more confident in her moves. One evening after class, he pulled her aside, giving her a rare compliment. "Jasmine, I've been watching you closely over the past few weeks. Your focus has improved, but more than that, your heart is stronger," he said with a smile. "You've become more than just a student here. You've become a warrior in your own life." Jasmine felt her heart swell at his words. She had always admired Mr. Tanaka's wisdom, but hearing this from him made her realize just how far she had come. She wasn't just learning karate to defend herself anymore. Karate had become her way of understanding herself better, of gaining control over her life, her emotions, and the challenges that came her way. The next day, as she walked through the school halls, she couldn't help but notice a change. The whispers were quieter, the stares less obvious. She felt as though she had finally earned her place, not by changing who she was, but by staying true to herself. Even Caitlin, who had once made it her mission to make Jasmine feel like an outsider, no longer seemed to have the same power over her. One day during lunch, Jasmine was sitting at her usual spot in the cafeteria when Mark joined her again. He had been her friend through all the ups and downs, offering support when things were tough. They had been hanging out more lately, studying together and sharing stories about their lives. "Hey, Jasmine," Mark said, sitting down across from her. "I heard something interesting today." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's that?" "Well, Caitlin and her friends, they were talking about you," Mark said, lowering his voice as if it was a secret. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had learned not to care what Caitlin said, but hearing that they were talking about her made her nervous. "What did they say?" Mark shrugged. "Well, it's actually kind of surprising. They said you've changed. Not just the way you act, but they said they respect you now. Caitlin even said you were someone she could actually talk to." Jasmine blinked, her mind racing. Respect from Caitlin? It didn't seem possible. "Really?" she asked, trying to hide her shock. "Yeah," Mark continued. "I know it's not exactly an apology, but it's something, right?" Jasmine sat back in her seat, processing Mark's words. It was strange to think about, but it made her realize just how much she had grown. Caitlin had always been a source of stress for her, someone who made her feel like she didn't belong. But now it seemed that things were different. Caitlin had seen the change in her and she respected it. That meant something to Jasmine. It meant that all her hard work, all the time she had stayed strong in the face of adversity, had paid off. The next day after class, Jasmine was walking to her locker when she spotted Caitlin standing nearby. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect. But Caitlin didn't look like her usual self. Instead of the smug, mocking expression she used to wear, there was a hint of hesitation in Caitlin's eyes. "Jasmine," Caitlin called out, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Jasmine stopped in her tracks. This was unexpected. The last time they had spoken, Caitlin had been rude and dismissive, but now there was something different about her. Jasmine nodded, a little unsure but curious nonetheless. "What's up?" Jasmine asked, keeping her tone neutral but calm. I just wanted to say something," Caitlin said, looking down for a moment before meeting Jasmine's eyes. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened between us." Jasmine didn't say anything. She had been hurt by Caitlin's actions in the past, but she also understood that people could change. It wasn't about holding grudges, it was about moving forward. "I just wanted to apologize," Caitlin continued, her voice quieter now. "I know I've been mean to you. And I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was because I was jealous, or maybe I just wanted to fit in. But that's no excuse for how I treated you. I'm sorry." Jasmine felt a mix of emotions, surprise, relief, even a bit of disbelief. Caitlin had apologized. This wasn't the same girl who had tried to make her feel worthless. And yet, Jasmine knew she had earned this moment not by seeking it, but by staying true to herself. She nodded slowly, accepting Caitlin's apology without hesitation. "Thank you," Jasmine said softly. "I appreciate that." Caitlin gave a small smile, and for the first time, Jasmine felt like they were both on the same page. Caitlin wasn't trying to tear her down anymore. Instead, she was acknowledging the strength Jasmine had shown throughout everything. And for Jasmine, that was enough. As the days went by, Jasmine found herself becoming more and more comfortable in her own skin. The fear and anxiety that had once ruled her life had slowly faded away. She wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but she knew she had the strength to handle them, and she didn't have to do it alone. Mark continued to be her friend and support system, and even some of the other students who had once ignored her were starting to open up. Jasmine wasn't the new girl anymore. She was someone who had earned respect, not by fitting in or changing who she was, but by standing strong and never giving up. One afternoon, as she was leaving the dojo after practice, Jasmine stood outside and looked at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over everything. She felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had come so far, and no matter what happened in the future, she knew she had the strength to face it. She had learned that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about believing in yourself, standing tall in the face of adversity, and never letting anyone else decide your worth. She was enough. And that was all that mattered. The following weeks at school felt different for Jasmine. She had come to realize that things weren't perfect, but they were getting better. The whispers that once filled the hallways now seemed quieter. The looks of judgment from Caitlin and her friends had faded into something less threatening, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel like she was finally settling into the place that had once felt so foreign. It wasn't just because the bullying had stopped, though. It was because Jasmine had learned something important about herself. She wasn't defined by what others said about her or how they treated her. She was stronger than that. Her karate had taught her how to be disciplined and focused, but it was the way she carried herself, her ability to stay calm in tough situations, that had given her the courage to face the world with more confidence. Jasmine continued to train at the dojo. Karate had become more than just a sport to her. It was a part of who she was, a tool that helped her stay grounded and reminded her of her inner strength. The training pushed her to keep growing, not just physically but mentally and emotionally as well. It was a reminder that no matter how tough things got, she had the power to face them head-on. As the days went on, Jasmine began to notice something else. The other students in her school were starting to treat her differently. She wasn't invisible anymore. People were beginning to see her, not as the new girl or the quiet outsider, but as someone who had something to offer. Even though she had started school as an unknown, she had now earned respect through her actions, her courage, and her resilience. One day during lunch, Jasmine was sitting at her usual spot when a girl she hadn't spoken to much before came over. Her name was Sarah, and she was someone who had always seemed friendly but had kept her distance, maybe out of fear of what others might think. But now she smiled and sat down next to Jasmine. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice warm. "Mind if I join you?" Jasmine looked up, surprised but pleased. "Of course, sit down," she said, clearing some space on the table. Sarah sat down with a small plate of food and looked at Jasmine. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said. "I've seen how you've handled everything, and I just wanted to say I think it's amazing how strong you are." Jasmine was taken aback. She hadn't expected to hear those words from someone like Sarah. They weren't close friends, but Sarah had always seemed nice. "Thank you," Jasmine replied with a smile. "I've been trying to stay strong, you know." "I know," Sarah said. "It's not easy, especially with people like Caitlin making things harder. I've seen it and I've heard things, but you've just kept going. I respect that." Jasmine felt a sense of pride. It wasn't just about surviving the bullying anymore. It was about earning the respect of others through her actions. She had made it through, not by fighting with fists, but by staying true to herself. As the conversation continued, Jasmine realized that she wasn't alone in this school anymore. She had started to make real connections with people, and those connections were built on respect, not popularity or fitting in. It felt good to know that there were people who saw her for who she truly was, not just the quiet new girl who didn't fit the mold. That afternoon, as she walked to her locker, she passed Caitlin and her group. For a moment, the familiar feeling of anxiety washed over her, but this time it was different. She wasn't scared anymore. She had made peace with who she was and what she had been through. She had grown stronger because of it. She was not the same girl who had walked into this school a few months ago, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. Caitlin noticed her as she walked by, and for the first time there was no sneer on her face. Instead, there was just a slight nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Jasmine to understand. Caitlin wasn't looking down on her anymore, and while that didn't mean they were suddenly friends, it was a sign of respect. Jasmine continued on to her locker, feeling a sense of calm that she had never experienced before. As she opened the locker and pulled out her books, she saw Mark approaching, a wide smile on his face. "Hey," he greeted, walking over to her. "How's it going?" Jasmine grinned back. "Pretty good, actually. It feels nice to just be me, you know," Mark chuckled. "I get that. I've seen the change in you. You're a lot more confident now." Jasmine nodded. "I think I'm finally figuring out who I am. I don't need to fit in with anyone. I'm just going to be myself." "Exactly," Mark agreed. "That's all that matters." As they talked, Jasmine realized just how much she had grown. She was no longer the shy, unsure girl who had walked into that school all those weeks ago. She had faced her challenges, dealt with the bullies, and stood up for herself. She had learned the importance of self-respect and the power of staying true to who she was, even when things seemed difficult. One evening, after a particularly intense training session at the dojo, Jasmine stood outside, feeling the cool evening air on her face. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the city. She took a deep breath, letting the calmness of the moment settle inside her. She had been through so much, but she knew she was stronger now. She wasn't the same girl who had been scared to speak up or afraid to stand out. She had learned to stand tall, to be confident in herself, and to take control of her own life. The bullying no longer had the power to define her. She had become someone she was proud of, a person who wasn't afraid to face challenges head-on, no matter how big or small. Jasmine knew that life wouldn't always be easy. There would always be obstacles, always be moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them. Her journey wasn't just about fighting the bullies or trying to fit in. It was about finding her own path and walking it with confidence. As the last light of the day faded, Jasmine stood there for a moment, feeling at peace with herself. She had come so far and she was only just beginning. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Jasmine was ready for whatever came her way. And with that thought, she smiled, knowing she was prepared to face anything that came next.